Section 1. A flawed ceasefire, Freeman's perspective. Chas Freeman, a seasoned diplomat and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense, doesn't mince words. He sees the proposed Minsk III ceasefire as a tactical maneuver, not a strategic solution. It's a band-aid on a gaping wound. The proposal, a mere 30-day pause in the fighting, lacks the political backbone to bring about a lasting peace. Freeman argues that this ceasefire is more about optics than outcomes. It allows the U.S. and its European allies to posture as peacemakers while they funnel more weapons into Ukraine. This approach, he warns, plays right into the hands of those who want a protracted conflict, not a negotiated settlement. This isn't just about military hardware, though. It's about understanding the motivations of all parties involved. Russia, Freeman contends, isn't interested in a temporary truce. They want a fundamental realignment of the European security architecture. A ceasefire without addressing these underlying issues is doomed to fail. What's needed, Freeman argues, is a fundamental shift in thinking. The U.S. and its allies need to move beyond short-term tactical considerations and engage in a meaningful dialogue with Russia about the future of Europe. Section 2. Tactical Maneuvers, Strategic Deadlock. The current U.S.-Ukraine discussions, according to Freeman, reek of tactical maneuvering. There's a distinct lack of strategic vision, a roadmap for a future where Ukraine isn't a pawn in a geopolitical chess match. This short-sightedness, he warns, is pushing the region closer to the brink. The proposed 30-day ceasefire exemplifies this tactical approach. It's a temporary measure designed to buy time and rearm, not a genuine attempt to address the root causes of the conflict. This approach, Freeman argues, plays into Russia's hands, allowing them to portray the West as untrustworthy and unwilling to engage in good-faith negotiations. The lack of a clear political solution is a glaring omission. Without a concrete plan for addressing Russia's security concerns and finding a mutually acceptable way forward, any ceasefire is likely to be short-lived. Freeman argues that this tactical approach is not only ineffective but also dangerous. It risks escalating the conflict and making a negotiated settlement even more elusive. Section 3. Europe. Divided and dependent. Europe, once a beacon of diplomacy and cooperation, finds itself in a precarious position. The continent is divided on how to approach the Ukraine crisis, caught between its dependence on the U.S. for security and its desire for a more autonomous foreign policy. Freeman highlights the lack of a cohesive European strategy. While individual nations have provided Ukraine with military aid, there's no unified vision for ending the war. This, he argues, exposes Europe's reliance on the U.S. for leadership and its struggle to forge a truly independent path. This dependence on the U.S., Freeman warns, comes at a cost. It limits Europe's ability to act as an honest broker in negotiations and risks dragging the continent further into a conflict that is not in its own best interests. The current situation is a wake-up call for Europe. It's time for the continent to shed its reliance on the U.S. and develop its own strategic autonomy, one that prioritizes diplomacy and de-escalation over military solutions. Section 4. The Propaganda War and its Casualties. The conflict in Ukraine is not just a war of tanks and missiles, it's a war of narratives, a battle for hearts and minds. Both sides have engaged in extensive propaganda campaigns, shaping public opinion and influencing the course of the conflict. Freeman points to the demonization of Vladimir Putin and Russia in Western media. The Russian president is often portrayed as a ruthless dictator bent on territorial expansion, while the complexities of the situation and Russia's legitimate security concerns are often overlooked. This one-sided narrative, Freeman argues, stifles meaningful debate and prevents the public from engaging with the nuances of the conflict. It creates a climate of fear and suspicion, making it difficult to find common ground and explore peaceful solutions. The casualties of this propaganda war are not just Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, but also the truth itself. In this environment of misinformation and manipulation, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction, making it all the more challenging to find a path to peace. Section 5. Russia's demands, non-negotiable or open to dialogue. Russia's demands for a political settlement, often painted as unreasonable and expansionist, are central to understanding the conflict's intractability. These demands, rooted in historical grievances and security concerns, cannot be ignored or dismissed out of hand. Firstly, Russia insists on Ukrainian neutrality, a guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO and become a platform for Western military forces on Russia's border. This demand, born from NATO's eastward expansion after the Cold War, reflects Russia's deep-seated fear of encirclement. Secondly, Russia demands the protection of Russian-speaking minorities in Ukraine. This issue, complex and fraught with historical baggage, has been used by both sides to fuel nationalist sentiments. Finding a solution will require addressing the legitimate concerns of these communities while respecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Finally, Russia seeks a new European security architecture, one that recognizes its interests and provides guarantees against future NATO expansion. This demand reflects Russia's belief that the current security order in Europe is outdated and unfairly biased against it. Addressing these demands will require creativity, flexibility, and a willingness to compromise. Dismissing them as non-starters will only perpetuate the cycle of violence and distrust. Section 6. Seeking a lasting peace, historical echoes. Finding a path to peace in Ukraine requires looking beyond the current impasse and drawing lessons from history's successes and failures. The Korean Armistice and the Peace of Westphalia, though separated by centuries and context, offer valuable insights into resolving seemingly intractable conflicts. The Korean Armistice, signed in 1953, provides a framework for managing, if not fully resolving, conflicts. It established a demilitarized zone and mechanisms for dialogue, preventing a resumption of full-scale war. While a permanent peace treaty remains elusive, the armistice demonstrates the value of pragmatic solutions that prioritize de-escalation. The Peace of Westphalia, a series of treaties signed in 1648, offers a model for ending religious wars and establishing a new international order. It recognized the sovereignty of states and their right to determine their own affairs, laying the groundwork for the modern nation-state system. These historical examples highlight the need for a political, not military solution in Ukraine. They underscore the importance of dialogue, compromise, and a recognition of the other side's legitimate security concerns. Section 7. Globalization's uncertain future. The conflict in Ukraine unfolds against the backdrop of a changing world order. Globalization, once seen as an inexorable force binding nations together, is facing unprecedented challenges. Freeman argues that the G7, including the United States, is increasingly isolating itself through erratic policies and antagonism towards countries like China and Russia. This self-imposed isolation, driven by a misguided belief in its own exceptionalism, undermines the very principles of interconnectedness and cooperation that underpin globalization. The United States, once a champion of free trade and open markets, is increasingly resorting to protectionist measures and economic coercion. This approach, Freeman warns, not only harms the global economy but also erodes trust in the United States as a reliable partner. The war in Ukraine has further exacerbated these trends, disrupting supply chains, fueling inflation, and deepening geopolitical divisions. It remains to be seen whether globalization can weather this storm, or whether the world is headed towards a more fragmented and unstable future. Section 8. The shifting sands of global power. The conflict in Ukraine has exposed the shifting sands of global power. The United States, while still a dominant force, is facing growing challenges to its hegemony, particularly from China's rise as an economic and technological powerhouse. China's economic success, driven by its manufacturing prowess and vast domestic market, is reshaping the global landscape. The United States, accustomed to unchallenged dominance, is struggling to adapt to this new reality. Its attempts to contain China's rise through tariffs, sanctions, and technological decoupling have proven largely ineffective. This power shift is not limited to the economic realm. China is also asserting itself on the world stage, advocating for a more multipolar world order and challenging the US-led liberal international order. The war in Ukraine has further accelerated these trends, pushing Russia and China closer together and highlighting the limitations of US power. The United States can no longer dictate the terms of global engagement. It must learn to compete and cooperate in a more multipolar world. Section 9. Broken promises, broken trust. The current crisis in Ukraine is not just a product of recent events. It is rooted in a long history of broken promises and eroded trust. The West's disregard for past agreements, from the expansion of NATO to the violation of the Iran nuclear deal, has created an environment of suspicion and resentment. The expansion of NATO eastward, despite assurances to the contrary, has been a sore point for Russia. It fueled Moscow's insecurities and created the perception that the West was encroaching on its sphere of influence. The United States' withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, despite Iran's compliance, further undermined trust in Western commitments. It sent a dangerous message that agreements, even when painstakingly negotiated, can be unilaterally discarded. This pattern of broken promises has made it exceedingly difficult to build trust and find common ground. It has created a climate of suspicion and resentment, making it all the more challenging to resolve the current crisis and prevent future conflicts.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.